Welcome to UK Business Show, UK's premier business show where we feature business thought leaders, high achievers, and industry experts. Today's episode is brought to you by World Outsourcing Solutions Limited, a company that specializes in helping executive business owners with virtual assistant services and business growth systems. Here's your host.
Welcome to the UK Business Show. I'm your host, Dennis Harhalakis, and today our guest is Dan Kirby. So do you want to make an impact in the world? Are you trying to build a sustainable business that creates positive change? If you are, you're in for a treat, because today we're going to be talking all about doing things better and working with a technology partner that gets what you want and is with you 100% of the way. And we're also talking about change and pivoting, lots of things that we end up doing all the time in our businesses. This show is all about helping entrepreneurs. And our guest, Dan, has been supporting entrepreneurs for over 20 years. So he has some amazing knowledge to share with us. Dan, welcome to the show.
Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. So Dan Kirby is the founder of the tech department and host of the amazing podcast, Honey, I Blew Up the Business, top rated show in the entrepreneurship category in Apple Podcasts. And the genesis of this is because back in 2017, Dan nearly blew up his business. So he started Honey, I Blew Up the Business to help other entrepreneurs through their journey. We're going to talk about that. Dan has a very unique communication style. It says he is raw, straight to the point, and incredibly candid. Expect a brutally honest account of his journey through entrepreneurship. So there's a great start. Dan, how are you doing today?
I'm feeling brutally candid.
Well, fantastic. Brutally candid and helpful is how we want our show to go. So let's start with the tech bootcamp. Can you share with us a little bit about your journey, what it does, what it excels at, and anything else you want to throw in?
Yeah, well, I've been an entrepreneur since 2001, and my business today, the tech department, is 18 years old this year, and we help predominantly startups, but any kind of early stage business grow using technology better. Yeah. Now, everybody today has to use technology better, irrespective of what business you're in. And the problem is everybody has the experience of having messed up the purchase of technology, be it some software or hiring an agency to build a website or try to build something custom. And the reason for that is that generally people approach technology projects in what I would say is the wrong way. They're focused on the wrong thing. Their kind of mindset is thinking very much about, firstly, the features and the specification and how interesting the technology is. Often the technology is really sexy. Yeah. But really, how is it improving your business? All right. So the tech bootcamp you referred to is our method, which is unique to us, which helps us ensure that the people we're working with are focused on what's most important, which is the improvement of their business, rather than the specification of a piece of technology or something new and exciting or shiny that you could build it in. And that sort of that insight, the focus on the improvement, is something that pretty much 99% of people who work in technology will not start the conversation with. I'm not slagging anybody off. It's just a mindset and a worldview which is very focused on the features rather than the improvement. Yeah, and there's nothing wrong with that. They're good features, but really the first principles needs to be how are you actually shifting the dial and creating some kind of measurable improvement for the company.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's an area that a lot of people get wrong. Is that around technology or tech startup? And is that specific to tech startups or a general issue?
This is in general. Right? So if you're in business and you're not a technologist, or even if you are a technologist, people will focus on, like I said, the technology itself rather first. So okay, so we need to manage your customer data better. Okay, you'll think, okay, I need to get a CRM. Yeah. And then you'll go onto Google and you'll Google CRM. And there's about, I don't know how many platforms or products or services that could service your CRM needs. And maybe you build something custom that costs you a lot of money from a development agency or a digital agency. And it maybe that's the right thing to do, but oftentimes you get into this kind of feature comparison thing around technology, and or this platform is better than that platform, and you very quickly get into the weeds,
Right.
And if you're not technical, and frankly, even if you are technical, when you get into the weeds, you can easily lose sight of what we would call your North Star.
Yeah.
Right? So what is the direction of travel you're heading? This way or that way? And why? Okay?
Sure.
And then actually the first thing you should do, so say you want to manage your customer data better, the first thing you do isn't necessarily buying a CRM. It might be something very simple, like having a posher spreadsheet, and then seeing if the information you get from that posher spreadsheet actually helps you improve your business profitability or speed or insight, etc. The point being is, at a certain point in time, yes, it's possibly worth investing a lot of money in something really clever, but that isn't necessarily the first step. And so almost like a kind of the mindset shift which we got to, and the reason we got there actually is the reason I set up the podcast, the Honey, I Blew Up the Business podcast, was because I did blow up my business. So the tech bootcamp method came out of the time I completely got it wrong. We were about to lose the business. We were hemorrhaging cash. It was all very dramatic. And I realized that I was not actually serving my customers' interests. And in that moment of drama was a moment of clarity, which was actually the first thing you should think about when you're thinking about technology. And this applies to anyone, whether it's a startup or an established business, is what will this thing improve? Yeah. And if you can't clearly see that, then maybe it's not the right choice.
Absolutely. And I noticed that when I checked through your 5-stage bootcamp process, you start with a very important point, which is mindset. So before we get on to going through that, any thoughts on what caused you to lose focus or connection with clients' needs, or what happened beforehand before you had that revelation, if you don't mind sharing that with us? Because I think it's important for people to realize where they can go wrong.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is a kind of important part of why I do the podcast, is to help other entrepreneurs see where the pitfalls are. And actually, the reason why mindset is the first step of our process, our method, the Tech Bootcamp, is because if your mindset's wrong as an entrepreneur, you will get everything else wrong.
Right.
Yeah. Now, technology is one way of something you can get wrong, but also what you can get wrong is the culture, the sales, the strategy, the management, etc. And I would say the answer to your question was, in fact, it all went wrong in 2017 for us. And that was, and it literally really crystallized on our 13th birthday.
Because you were really successful up until that point. You were flying all over the world. You were at conferences. You were really kicking it.
Well, we'd grown. We were a bootstrapped company, service industry. We were working with lots of the biggest companies in the world, creating bespoke software or innovation solutions. So people like NBC Universal would subcontract to us to build digital products globally. Wow. And we built the BBC Children in Need fundraising platform, and then helped them optimize how they ran that to get record fundraising years for 5 or 6 years in a row. Mm. So we were operating at a very, very high level and very high profile, and it was really good fun, lots of money. And I think that year I'd been named as one of the top 25 most innovative people in Europe, Middle East, and Asia by a global marketing magazine, amongst other accolades. And actually, we'd just been flown to Austin, Texas for the South by Southwest Festival by the British government, no less, who asked us to host a series of events at their presence at this massive technology festival conference. Anyway, we came back from that, and me thinking I was the king of the world, and then it all went wrong. And the reason it went wrong was because my mindset wasn't right about the business. And I'd actually, I now look back and see it more clearly. I kind of checked out. I'd lost a kind of an emotional connection to the actual service we were delivering. And so whilst we were working for these big companies and doing really interesting work, and like I say, award-winning interesting work, it wasn't satisfying me on some deep level.
Yeah.
And so I think I just was dialing it in and enjoying the fruits, but not being diligent about the roots, let's say.
Wow. Okay, that's a nice way of putting it. So
Yeah.
yes, you weren't there. You weren't present in the
No.
way that you needed to be, and of course that interferes with your ability to connect with your customers, see their vision, and articulate it for them, or at least implement it for them.
Yeah, and then when it was more corrosive for the team, really. I think there was a management team in place, a managing director in place, people were running the business, but I think they sensed from a kind of, from my point of view, that I wasn't fully engaged. And again, at the time, by the way, I was working really hard. It wasn't like I was like at the beach every day. I was working really hard, but I think at some level I was just dialing it in. And I'd got a little bit bored. And so my mindset wasn't right. I wasn't really connected with what I was doing. You know, we were 13 years old as a company. It's kind of some time had elapsed. And I think we'd evolved into a place where I wasn't fully there. Now, when it became apparent that it was all going wrong, and we had to make a significant amount of redundancies from a team of 25 to a team of 15. And even then, that wasn't enough to get our kind of costs lower than our income, because the whole thing collapsed. And the whole thing was a real mess, like personally and professionally, over that summer. And I remember it was a clarifying moment right in the middle of it, like the eye of the storm, when the sort of man who'd got all the awards suddenly landed back down to earth with a bump. And my ego was laying in sort of fragments around me. And there was no way I could like fool myself anymore that I couldn't pretend that I was good at this, because transparently it had gone completely wrong. The numbers told the story, you know, so I'd cocked it up. So I just sort of had to, in that moment where of sort of eating the biggest slice of a humble pie, reflected quite honestly to myself that actually what we were doing as a business was serving the wrong God, as it were. Like we were trying to do things that were really fun and really exciting and really good, but actually weren't like if you were eating McDonald's all the time. It's kind of tastes great, and then really you want some salad. You know, you want to do something happy, something meaningful. So we were doing all these fun projects, but it wasn't really hitting what I wanted to do. And really what I wanted to do was, in that moment, I thought, well, rather than doing fun technology that's really interesting, why don't we create technology that actually improves our clients' businesses, and then we can measure that and show the improvement? Because at that point, well, I said to myself, it's a better bet to build a business that actually serves the genuine interests of my customers and actually genuinely creates business improvement using technology, which is an incredible tool, rather than how much technology can I sell to someone with the most amount of features that is good for me and my team, but isn't necessarily so good for the customer.
Right. So is that about making the most difference to the customer, both in absolute terms and in a measurable term? You can go, we built this, or we helped you build this, and we've really taken this into a new direction for you or with you. So that sounds like a real kind of pivot point. Did you have to change the type of companies that you worked with then?
Yeah, so in that moment of clarity was the moment of clarity, but it took a long time for us to navigate the collapse of the business. It did not collapse, as I should say, it collapsed, we didn't go bust. We swerved that problem and rebuilt the business, but it took a while for that insight to sink in and actually change operationally. But the key thing is, to your point, is like actually showing measurable improvement as a first principle is the shift in mindset that happened to me in that crash moment. So what happened was, it turns out that big companies, whilst they may say they want to see improvement, actually, when it comes down to it, they just really want to spend their budget and have some numbers that approximate improvement. But really, when it comes down to it, they're not that bothered if you're a middle manager in a corporation. However, entrepreneurs who it's their own business, their own passion, their own money, are really, really focused on creating improvement in their companies.
Sure, and for their clients as well.
Exactly that, because there's a very direct feedback loop. You know, if you have happy customers, you get more money, and people stick with you for longer. And the feedback loop is very, very direct. So what we found was working with initially with high growth SMEs, small businesses, with the founder to run our method, which is actually just a way of integrating strategy into the code. All right. So so whether method we run builds on like I say, finding out what you want to do and why, and then build a plan to deliver that boot camp by boot camp. So that's vision and strategy integrated into the coding of something, right? Often those two things are very different. A developer will ask you, what do you want me to build? Not why do you want me to build it?
So that's really interesting, because you're talking about kind of building vision and strategy into the DNA, into the code of the product. So now you're talking about technology, you're talking about SMEs, you're talking about a different type of organization that's trying to achieve different things.
Yeah, exactly that. And because ultimately the purpose of a business, is as stated by what the entrepreneur wants to do. Ultimately, it needs to survive and make profit and serve its customers and keep going and achieve its goals. So any technology that's been either bought or built within that business has to serve that purpose. Now, that isn't always the case, right? Now, and I know it sounds kind of like a statement of the bloody obvious, and it is that it should. But I say people don't think in that way. They go, I need a new website. Well, is it Shopify? Is it Magento? Is it PHP? Is it .NET? Let's speak to lots of people in the market. Let's ask them lots of questions. And what they will do is they'll go, great, you need a website. Well, have you thought about having an integrated map? Have you thought about building a custom application into it? What about a mobile application? Right? What they won't say is, why are you doing what you're doing? And then why are you actually not wanting a website? And really, what's this about? Okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And part of my blow up got me to say, okay, first principles, we need to find that bedrock, because if you build on the bedrock, then whether you're an established business or you're a startup business, you're much more likely for this thing to work, and you're much more likely to get results out of the back of it.
Yeah. So there's that almost like that fundamental question. If you phrase it around, why am I here? What am I trying to do? Then if you use that as your framework, then your answers become a little clearer. Would that sum it up?
Yeah, we say we try and establish what is your North Star.
Yeah.
So what's the direction of travel? And then you can plot a path towards the North Star, and you might wiggle your way there, but at least you're heading generally in the direction.
Fantastic. So that's your starting point. That was number one. Run us through the rest of the process, and if you can sort of point out where each part of it adds some kind of measurable point of success for entrepreneurs, please feel free to plug it.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so this method is really extremely good as a way of getting your thinking straight about any kind of new piece of technology. So first start with why. Like, why are you doing this and what you're trying to do? We would define that as your North Star. We have a method, a workshop, which we run with our clients that helps establish that. And really, it's basically what you're trying to do and why. Honestly, what's the real issue? And then once you've got that down, your North Star, you can then plot a path to it. Then what we would, our philosophy is, our argument is that you should only do the smallest thing for the least amount of money, the least amount of effort, to try to go the furthest way towards your North Star.
Okay, sounds like a good entrepreneur mindset.
Yeah, so rather than, so again, this is, by the way, not many people it's very counterintuitive when you go to a sort of development partner, because they want to build it perfectly. But this is like a hypothesis. So if you have an idea about what's going to get you furthest towards your North Star, that's a hypothesis, a guess. And what you need to do is test your guess in the real world. So say, going back to our example about CRM, right? You could go and buy Salesforce, and it might cost you a lot of money and a lot of money to maintain. However, what you might need is just a posh spreadsheet. Okay, the reason is you might just need to get a little bit of customer data that's slightly different to what you've got now, and then apply that in the real world and see what happens. Okay, because the issue isn't CRM or managing your data better. The issue is, can I have a better relationship with my customer?
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's the hypothesis to test.
Yeah. So those are the first two or three. Where are we on?
So point one is mindset. Point two is plan. So once you've got a mindset, you know where you're going. Point two is plan. You create the simplest thing for the biggest impact. Step three is take action. right?
Right.
Do something, all right? And that's something, it could be a piece of research, it could be a piece of design, it could be some building something, it could be amending or maintaining something, but it's a project, all right? Then after you've done it, before you start doing anything, what we do is we create an improvement scorecard. An improvement scorecard is a grid in which there are 5 things, no more than 5, because you can't really track more than 5 things, that we intend to improve. Right? That could be sales. It could be speed of updating a website. It could be the ease of collaborating across a company. It could be qualitative or quantitative. But before you start to do anything, you should have an intention about what you're trying to improve, and some data about where you are today, some benchmark. And the benchmark could be 0 because you don't know, right? Then you build, so you take some action. And at the end of taking the action, the thing goes into the wild, right? So you've made your posh spreadsheet, and part of your intention is that your salespeople will be able to make better phone calls and get more sales. That's part of the intention, the hypothesis to test. So a month after launching your posh spreadsheet, you can go to your salespeople and say, okay, you're getting 10 sales a month with the old data. We've now got posh spreadsheet data. How many sales have you made this month? And the number in that box and next to the old number is either bigger or smaller, or possibly the same, right? Now, either way, whether it's bigger or smaller, you want to A, know, and B, do something about it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Right? So the transparency of that is key, because if you don't know, you can't fix it.
So it sounds to me like you're making small changes, trying them out, and possibly engaging with the will it work, won't it work, and failure process. So maybe you talk a little bit more about that, because I noticed that you in your podcast, you interview people that have had really challenging moments or possibly massive failures and recovered from them, or at least handled those. So what do most people get wrong about failure? What do you mean when you use the word failure in this context?
It's funny because failure is a term that's bandied around, like fail fast, or everyone needs to learn from failure. But I mean, again, failure is I guess when things go wrong or not as you would expect them to, right? So your expectations are in one area, and then reality unfolds, and it's not what you would expect, right? That's what often people define as failure. But really, it's just data. Yeah, and perhaps your expectations were wrong.
Right. So it's data points without emotion.
There you go. Yeah, exactly. So it's just, your wife leaves you. It's data. It's maybe you're just not a very good husband. Maybe she's, but the point is, this is all information. Now, if you look at things, take the emotion out of it and say, well, okay, my great idea for a product is so perfect that when I launch it, everyone's going to love it. But if nobody does, it doesn't matter how much you believe it's a great idea. Again, your ego's got in the way. So all failure is is data from the universe telling you, or from the market telling you that it didn't really work. Your expectations weren't correct.
Absolutely. So that's that when we talked about kind of every failure can be turned into your success as long as you want to learn from it. What blocks people?
Ego, primarily. And not wanting to embrace reality. There's a guy called Ray Dalio, who's the world's #1 hedge fund manager, or he runs he wrote a book called Principles.
He does. Bridgewater, very successful.
Bridgewater Associates, exactly that. So he's in his book Principles, the first principle, his first life principle is to embrace reality and deal with it. But that infers you need to understand what reality is and see it clearly. And often the human mind is very good at tricking itself into believing things that aren't necessarily real, because it would hurt your feelings, it would hurt your sense of your own identity, or your sense of, that's what I mean by ego. You believe, so Dan Kirby in 2016 thought he was really hot, and he had lots of data to prove that, right? Dan Kirby in 2017, turns out the data was perhaps an impartial set. Yeah. So when I was crying into my coffee and in my moment of reality, my ego had misled me. So I made poor decisions, and then the decisions came back to kind of haunt me. And that's a good example. So often as a founder, as an entrepreneur, what I found as a direct result of my blow up experience was, the more I worked on myself, the more inward I went to understand my psychology, my emotional state, my way of seeing the world, my mindset, or you could say worldview, or you could say philosophy, ways of seeing things. The more I worked on that, there was a direct line result to A, my personal life getting better, and B, my professional life getting better, which I mean the business got better because I was seeing things more clearly.
Yeah, and of course that makes a huge amount of sense, because if you're not able to understand what the universe is saying to you, you're unable to move forward from that point. And I guess so. Let's talk about the podcast now, because that's where you are talking to people and asking them the very same question: what's the worst thing that happened to you, and what did you learn from it? So what have you learned from them, and what have you learned from the podcast?
Yeah, well, we launched the podcast about a year or so ago, and we've so far interviewed 53 people of a variety of stripes, some quite early stage businesses, and some people with a number of people with OBEs, and people dialing in from San Francisco and Barbados and all sorts. So we've had some kind of really an interesting cast of characters, all of which are entrepreneurs, and all of which, or many of which, extremely successful. And what's been an interesting is that everybody has these experiences, right? Sure. And again, it's something that a lot of people who come on the podcast, a lot of my guests, are really thankful to me for doing what we're doing, because what we're actually showing is the sort of behind the scenes of what it's really like to run a business.
Right.
So not the entertainment version on Dragon's Den, the kind of real life, okay, all these people like who've got an OBE and multiple millions of pounds and what have you, that wasn't always the case.
Well, indeed. And so you only get to buy the Dyson product that was finished. You didn't try the 2,950 versions that he went through before he actually got that vacuuming thing worked out correctly.
So there's an entire PR departments around the world that make everybody look shiny and polished, and everyone's got their stuff together. But everybody I've spoken to has a number. Well, again, we end up focusing on a moment. What I aim to do in the podcast is to dwell in the moment where they didn't know it was going to come back or work.
Wow. That's a very scary space.
Yeah, I mean, because you don't want to go there. And so it's I think because I've been in that space and I'm quite open about it, I can kind of like, again, a number of guests have said on the podcast, this is like therapy, because I'm more interested in the individual entrepreneur than I am their business. And so what will often happen is something will go wrong or something will be going off track. And so you know when you read the story as it plays out that just around the corner is the light at the end of the tunnel. But the entrepreneur in that moment hasn't seen that light. They're in the darkness, and they're afraid, and they're broken, and they're lonely, and they're feeling foolish and stupid and shame, and they think they've messed it all up. They feel like an idiot. Like oftentimes the word shame comes up. It's like you carry this feeling of like, I just let everybody down, and I've let myself down, I felt this, by the way, in 2017 very, very strongly.
Yeah. And of course, some things you can't control. So I should have seen this coming. I should have known better. I should have done better. All these shouldas are getting in your way of moving forward.
Yeah. And it's very toxic, actually, because it's a complex dynamic world we live in. I mean, you can't predict, I don't know, Ukrainian invasions and pandemics, within your business plan from 3 or 4 years ago. Nobody could. So these I think so. Again, part of the mission in the podcast, or the mission in the podcast, is to help other entrepreneurs avoid the pitfalls I made, but also get a sense of companionship and solace, perhaps, that because we're all like struggling along week to week, doing our thing. And often things aren't going exactly as we would like. And they may not be as dramatic as my 2017 experience, but this up and down is just the sort of ebb and flow of an entrepreneurial experience. And so what I want to do is sort of get the guests to sort of share what really went on, because the listener will learn from that and get experience from that. And there is these patterns that we all follow. And really, it's just another day at the office. It's just the way it is. And so the sort of particularly narrow path we've chosen to pursue is just, this is what it is. So if you understand that, and the sort of solace I find in that is that, yeah, that's the way it is. And so I'm kind of, if I want to get the upside of what my job allows me, my calling as an entrepreneur allows me, then I've got to price in the downsides, because there's a yin yang for all of that. Every upside, there's a downside.
Well, yeah, indeed. There's an expression. It's just another cold night on the north face of Everest. So this is what you should expect at some point, if not at regular intervals.
Exactly that, yeah.
So Dan, this has been fascinating. We've got to bring it to a close, unfortunately. What would you sum up a few things, a couple of things for our listeners to take away from this in terms of, what you've distilled for yourself over all your guests over the past 18 years? Or however long you want.
Well, I mean, I'd say, two things. One, if you're to do with technology, which is my day job, if you're looking at any kind of form of technology, before you start buying anything or commissioning anything or building anything, just make it really, really clear what you're trying to achieve out of it strategically. What's the point?
Right.
Why are you doing it? Right. And have that really clear in your mind before you start engaging with anything. So that's point one on technology, and point two on psychology. After interviewing 53 people, I often ask at the end of the interview, what is the advice that entrepreneurs should ignore? Because we're obviously all dishing out advice.
Oh yes, we're all full of good advice, aren't we?
Exactly, and so I wish I'm going to contradict myself here, but what ends up happening is the vast majority, I'd say 80% of people who answer that question say, ignore all advice.
Yeah? Excellent. My advice is ignore all advice.
Yes, and they say, well, take it on board, but people who aren't you don't know your circumstances, your belief system, your values, your mission. Now they have their experience, their belief system, values, and mission, and maybe it's very appropriate, but somebody who's been really good in financial services doesn't understand the healthcare market, or someone who's big in technology doesn't understand graphic design. So the different things, people want to help, but again, they can kind of dish out advice, and maybe it's right, maybe it's not. But what comes out of it is that this is counterintuitive in a rational-minded world. Okay, is that of those 80% of people who said ignore advice, they then go on to say, listen to your intuition, listen to your gut. All right, because that is telling you what to do. So ignore everybody else and listen to your gut is what people say on my podcast. So give it a listen, and it's full of rich lessons that I think everybody can benefit from.
Absolutely fantastic place to leave it on. Dan, where can people find you?
Well, if you want to go and check out the podcast, go to honeyiblew-up-the-business.com or at businessblewup on Twitter and Instagram. And also it's on LinkedIn. And if you want to check me out, I'm on LinkedIn, Dan Kirby, the tech department. I'm also on Twitter at the Dan Kirby, also on Instagram and Twitter at the Dan Kirby. So check me out, send me a note, happy to chat. And hopefully you've got some value from my ups and downs and experiences.
Thank you very much. We'll make sure that we put links to all of those into the show notes. Dan, it's been absolute pleasure today, and I've really enjoyed our conversation. So much richness, and listeners, please make sure, if you do nothing else, you go and check out the podcast. There's some amazing episodes with some amazing entrepreneurs. So that's all we've got time for. Thank you again for tuning into the UKI Business Show. Till next time.
Thank you for listening to UKI Business Show. We will be back to bring you more episodes with success stories and advice straight from the experts. Want more? Check out www.ukibusinessshow.com. Get your free trial of our virtual assistant service today. Just visit www.worldoutsourcingsolutions.com. Quote WOS18 or send us an email at support@worldoutsourcingsolutions.com.